Well, thank you for everybody who's come today. And first of all, I want to say a huge thank you to Sunny and to her whole team, especially the director and the chief curator and the research and publication team who've welcomed me here and helped me coordinate all the practical matters. Thank you. Well, I fell in love with your country and your people and your cultures in 2004, which is some time ago now, at the ICOM Triennial Conference. And I've been delighted to return a number of times since. And I think of today as a beginning. So please write down my email address and do keep in touch with me, because I'm afraid I haven't got any of those cards that everybody else has. Okay, in this session, I want to share with you my collaborative work over 25 years on expanding museum representation to demonstrate the complexity of identities and show how museums can function as democratic spaces, promoting social justice and inclusion. In addition to my own work at the Horniman Museum in London, the University of Leicester, and in ICME, the International Council for Museums and Collections of Ethnography or World Art, I note international examples and consider how museums can become places where power might be positively shared so that new voices and visibilities can be raised, notably those of Black, Asian, and minority ethnic groups, LGBTQI, lesbian, bisexual, gay, transsexual, intersexual, queer people. Overall, I'm going to highlight cases that transform the traditional site of top-down authorial control into more democratic and engaging places of creative conversations, to refer to Ulf's work earlier, both inside and outside the museum, at a realm I term the frontiers, a space of critical dialogue and activism towards human rights and equity in the wider world. It's at these frontiers beyond national borders that we might progress an optimistic zone of feminist hermeneutics, or fresh interpretations, I argue, where new communities can be built together with diverse peoples to challenge prejudice in general and racism and sexism in particular. In other words, I'm going to note theoretically grounded museum work on dismantling traditional power relations and hierarchies that determines who speaks and who listens in museums. Over my time in the museum field, I've developed close alliances with international colleagues that have become friendships. And I want to explain the notion of the terrible gift which has informed collaborative work. I'm going to note ongoing collaborative work, activism, and friendship over 3 decades now with a creative writer, Professor Joan Animado, who is this person here, and the Caribbean Women Lighters Alliance, that I outline in my monograph, Learning at the Museum Frontiers, this book here. And also ongoing collaboration with anthropologist Professor Wayne Modest, and the book that we wrote together, an edited book, that we discuss these ideas in museums and communities, collections and collaboration. So my focus today is on building new theoretical frameworks to inform a diversity of approaches in museums that were employed by collaborating with creative people to benefit diverse audiences, children and adults. In addition to my own practice, further attention will be on artist collaboration with art galleries around the world that I hope might be useful to you here in Korea. I consider, for example, the Guerrilla Girls Network and their recent project, The Complaints Department, that raised feminist voices at Tate Modern recently, and the sensory work of Felix Gonzalez-Torres that drew attention to LGBTQI voices. And I'm going to offer you a very brief overview of museum resources, specially designed and made to engage minds and bodies and emotions, especially of family audiences to museums, such as the object dialogue boxes made by Headsole British artists, art carts and backpacks. So to interrogate these ideas, I'm going to invite you to be engaged in some active learning. And we're going to explore together sensory ways of knowing that emphasize creativity in terms of process and outputs, as well as issues of agency and authority. So conversation, creative writing, and drawing exercise will be offered. And then I will try to draw some tentative conclusions. So let me start with an artist from the USA whose work speaks to our theme of how the museum might function as a democratic space, promoting social justice and inclusion. Felix Gonzalez-Torres produced artwork from everyday objects, piles of sweets, an empty bed, that I regard as really moving and dazzlingly beautiful. His work's been described as profound meditations on love and loss. And here you see one of his untitled pieces, Portrait of Ross in LA, which is composed of multicolored sweets, individually wrapped in cellophane. The dimensions are variable, but here they make up a mat of approximately 92 by 92 centimeters. So this Untitled series represents the artist's partner, Ross Laycock, who died of an AIDS-related illness in 1991. Gonzalez-Torres used the museum as a democratic space here, where he drew attention to the widely silenced and misunderstood disease of AIDS. He shows us how the LGBTQI community can gain inclusion in museum space, and how also their issues can be raised with different audiences. This installation comprises 175 pounds of sweets, which corresponds to Ross's ideal body weight. Visitors to the work are encouraged to take one of the sweets, which are wrapped in the colourful shiny papers, and piled up. And the diminishing pile parallels Ross's weight loss during his last fatal illness and his sufferings prior to death. Gonzalez-Torres specified that the pile be perpetually replenished during the installation in a creative act that may be seen as death-defying, and in some metaphorical way, a godlike granting of eternal life. When using these baci sweets, meaning kiss in Italian, taking a sweet here is likened to taking a forbidden kiss, a kiss from a gay man. Although the artist died in 1996 of AIDS-related illnesses, his work has continued to receive international attention, and he was elected as the United States representative in the 2007 Venice Biennale, only the second artist ever to have been chosen posthumously. One visitor commented, "Over the 4 months of its unraveling, Untitled, Placebo, will give us a chance to reflect not only on the continuing AIDS epidemic, but to contemplate on the universal experiences of illness, death, and loss that the sculpture in part symbolizes." So this example shows visitors engaging with the 5 senses we count in the West, looking at the artwork, touching the sweets, listening to the sounds as we open the wrappers, smelling the aroma before tasting, are powerful triggers to conversation. In 2015, Tate Britain organised an exhibition which was an immersive display of pour paintings and multi-sensory experiences shown on the map here to challenge the traditional art gallery experience, which is overwhelmingly visual. Since a person's brain understands the world by combining what it receives from all the senses, Tate decided to invite visitors on guided visits to explore whether taste, touch, smell, and sound can change the way we see art. Tate used technology, a wristband device, to record and review individual physiological responses to the sensorium. As you see here, the map on the right, the map on the right, the map on the right indicates artwork in the gallery where sensory ways of knowing might be employed after the sensorium. Now we have the next size. So this is a Francis Bacon painting, and in front of the painting there was a bed of chocolate grass, which echoes the granular texture of the artwork. As the visitor tastes the chocolate while looking at the figure in the landscape, we might note here the Black cultural theorist Stuart Hall's encoding and decoding model that blurs distinctions between processes of art production and consumption to view audience members as part of the production process, constructing and disseminating the artist's messages. Hall tells us that artists encode messages in the making processes, but to have an effect on the audience, the messages must be meaningfully and personally decoded. The important point is to see art audiences as active agents who do not simply absorb messages produced. We can go further and note Sharon MacDonald, who writes of audiences not only decoding but recoding the message and reproducing meanings that may radically differ from those intended at the point of production. Tate's sensorium is extraordinary for shifting the gallery's power of representation and the framing of elite identity to focus on the identities of audiences and their reception through the sense of taste. So I wonder what smells and sounds might resonate with this painting. Rashers of bacon cooking and sizzling in a pan, perhaps. What music might enhance the experience. I wonder what sounds you would offer this visitor to the bacon painting. What smells? What personal memories and connections might your ideas trigger in visitor conversations? And I want you to discuss your ideas with your neighbour. And I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to do that. So please talk to the person next to you about how you might enhance this visitor's experience with some sounds or some smells. Over to you. If you're sitting farther away from someone, perhaps you should move closer together so that you can talk to each other. Well, time is going frighteningly fast here, so we'll move on. And I'll speak to you about my work with Joan Animado in museum outreach sessions. So Joan Animado here, she has been thinking not only about her personal experiences in a human lifetime, but about the lifetime of her community. She was especially thinking about transatlantic enslavement, where Caribbean people, African people were transported to the Caribbean and enslaved under terrible circumstances to produce sugar to sweeten European people's tea. And the work that we did together over several decades was a democratic talking back or a creative moment from being the silent object of museum narratives to becoming the speaking subjects. So raising voices, new voices in the museums makes them a democratic space. And I'd like to quote Marlene Nobessi-Phillips, a Canadian theorist here. She worked with us on a number of occasions. And this is part of her creative piece that she wrote during a museum workshop. And it's just sections from it, The Museum of Silence. As I wandered throughout this museum, I recognized many of the displays. These silences were mine as much as they belonged to the people they'd been taken from. Return them, I demanded of the proprietors. You must return these silences to their owners. Without their silence, these people are less than whole. It had been theft originally, I continued, but now it was nothing but intimidation. It was mine, ours, I challenged, to do with as we pleased, to destroy if we wanted. They told me the silences were best kept where they could be labeled, annotated, dated, and catalogued. It was only one of the world's wonders, they told me, this Museum of Silence. Never had so much silence been gathered together under one roof, and they were proud of it. So in Nobessi's text here, we see feminism and interpretation, feminist hermeneutics in practice. And this empowers people to destroy the artifacts if they so wish. We produced this work over 2 years, this booklet here. I keep pressing the wrong button. In this booklet here, it's the result of 2 years' work of creative workshops, writing workshops in the museum. And I'm going to speed ahead to the next slide. The sort of theory that empowered the work we were doing is something I term feminist hermeneutics. And this is about having conversations, really, in museums. It's about empowering conversations that are as equal as we can possibly get them. And so to promote these sorts of conversations, we encourage our audiences to come into the museum and to have a respectful dialogue with us. And so we respect the other, the visitor, as a thou. And we hope that in this way, in this new museum space, in this frontier space, we can challenge our prejudices, we can reflect and come to new understandings and to look together to future possibilities. And I thought I would quickly show you some work that seems to me to be based on these ideas of progressing democratic conversations in other museums. This is the Tate Britain, and it's a piece that was organized with 9-year-old students, and they were engaging in a dance performance. And they were looking at this painting here, Penelope and her suitors. And they wanted to not see Penelope as a passive wife waiting at home, but as somebody actively stopping herself getting remarried. And they also wanted to connect, well, the teacher wanted them to connect this painting with other powerful women in history, such as Rosa Parks, who refused to sit on the bus in the 1960s as part of the civil rights protest in America. And this is a piece of work that we did at Horniman with autistic children. And we were looking at this headdress, which was made by the Shona peoples of Southern Africa. And the teacher wanted the children to make a connection with each other, which they found very difficult. So part of the project was to ask the child to lie down on a pillow-shaped piece of cloth, and for their partner to draw around them. And then above this outline of their sleeping self, they would write and draw images that came from their own dreams, because the Shona headdress is thought to encourage dreaming. And another part of the work that we did with these children was also writing poetry. Simple poetry exercises are ways to make children literate, and literacy is a huge problem in our country. So this is Shola Oleyele, a Nigerian colleague, and she's working with another group of children with these bois masks, and they're writing and performing some acrostic poems, which is when you write a word down the page. I'm going to use the right button now. So this is bois, B-W-A, and then the first letter inspires a line of poetry. So bois mask, where are you from? Africa. And this is one about my name here, Viv, is a woman who has videos and other things, and I thought that that's something you might do for your homework, and maybe email me about your results. Okay. And this is a slide about the idea of Roger Simon's terrible gifts, and it's about some work that I've been doing over 12 years now in northern Iraq with a colleague here, Amira Ibrahim, and her team. And once a year in May, Amira and the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan, a political group, have an exhibition. So it's not a beautiful exhibition, it's in their community hall. And they put up photographs of people who'd been murdered under the Saddam Hussein regime, and the artworks that the prisoners had made as gifts to their family members. And there's a candle in front of the photographs and the artworks that you see on the wall. And you see this mother who is broken down. Her whole body is folded up in tears when she sees her son. And Roger Simon's ideas about the terrible gift are that we see these things, and if we really come to an understanding of them, we don't just go away and forget about them, but we take them and the responsibility of them as a gift, and it's a terrible gift because it means that we need to take some action and change our own lives. We have to do something to make the future a better place for the sake of those people who've gone before and given us those gifts from experiencing terrible things in their home countries. The other things that I wanted to talk to you about were the Guerrilla Girls, who had an exhibition at the Tate Modern a couple of years ago. And there you see me with one of the Guerrilla Girls. And they started work in the 1980s in America, protesting about women in museums largely being painted, the objects of the painter's brush and the painter's gaze, rather than the active creators of paintings. But nowadays, Guerrilla Girls are inside the museum space, which is interesting. So in Tate Modern, they had this installation which was called the Complaints Department. And people were encouraged to come and talk to a guerrilla girl, and also to make some artwork, as Ulf was explaining earlier. And this star here, it's a protest about refugees and the way they're treated in Calais. And other protests were about the height of museum labels, which really annoys me. And a woman had written, "I don't know why museum labels are down here, because my knees don't have eyes." And that's something that constantly bugs me as well. So what I was thinking was, although this didn't work brilliantly well before, because maybe you're all a bit far away from each other, but I thought that you might talk to the person next to you about some sort of non-inclusive practice in museums that makes you really cross. What is it that really annoys you about museums, and how might you take action to change that? So I thought that you might write or draw your complaints and decide how to act. So I'm only going to give you 30 seconds to do this, so it won't be too torturous. And over to you again. Yeah. Okay, the scary clock is ticking away the time here, so we'll move on. Okay. I don't know how many people know about these object dialogue boxes, but they're made by an artist couple, Carl and Kimberly Foster, and their company is called Headsaw. And they make surreal objects. So here you see some bananas, wooden bananas, and they have fingernails on the end. And this is one of our students, Sherry and I, who were using the bananas, and also this object here, which is a toothbrush, and it makes the flag go yes, no, yes, no. And so the idea with these objects is that they really inspire us to have a conversation, a critical conversation, and they make us question what's truth in museums. They really spark off our curiosity and our imagination. The first way that they inspire your curiosity is you're confronted with a box, or your class is confronted with the box, and this is an example at Manchester. It's like a beehive, and you have to think, how does it open? Well, each of these layers opens up, and there is a surreal object. This here you see a cat with lots of little beads and buttons on its head. And these objects, they act as compasses, so they attract you to an object in the museum in some way. So this object here, the yellow, might attract Sherry and I to a painting with yellow, or because it's made of wood, it might attract us to something made of wood. And the students that I used to take to Manchester Art Gallery, they either loved or hated these things. So, yeah. Another thing that I'm quite fond of are the backpacks that many museums in the UK use now. And again, they encourage the child to be at the center of the visit. So a child of an age-specific group has a backpack, and they go with their family, and they guide their family to a particular part of the gallery. And then they can engage in creative activities. It might be fuzzy felt making, or listening to a story about a feast. And they benefit the museum because they focus the visit, and of course they also benefit the child and the family because it makes them discover things for themselves, and it makes the museum visit fun. The other thing that many museums also do now are the art carts. And the art carts are interesting because you can have a piece of paper that you can draw on and drawing materials, but you also have these question cards which can inspire conversations with the visiting group. So a visitor might be asked to use their bodies, be a tree, use your arms and elbows and balance, make yourself melt onto the floor, or be a compass, spin and try and point north. Some cards direct attention to museums' displays, lean against the wall, placing your body as far away from it as possible. Can you turn yourself into a wall or a floor pop? And other cards draw attention to the museum exhibitions. So I'm coming to an end now, and I thought that I might quickly try to draw some conclusions. So I've been looking at a number of pathways to having creative conversations in museums and power sharing with visitors. So we looked a tiny bit at how creative writing can enable the museum to share power and serve as a starting point for representation. We had a little bit of gentle theorizing, looking at the theory of the frontiers and feminist hermeneutics and the terrible gift. And those ideas really helped the museum where I worked to become what my Caribbean collaborators called a home place. So it was a place that wasn't so very different from their home, somewhere where they could feel comfortable and to return to again and again throughout their lives. We also saw how Tate Modern and the National Gallery and Tate Britain can act as a bridge or a space of movement and reinvention and rearticulation for visitors of all ages. At Horniman, this demanded rejecting the thingness, actively asserting the self against primitive stereotypes that linger in the 21st century. And that work is being engaged by members of my ICOM group, ICME, and it's about co-creation for a human world where our common humanity is foregrounded and safeguarded. It involved us in ICME in looking at the senses in a wider sense than the 5 that we count in the West. So there are African groups in Ghana, the Anwe Ekwe peoples. For them, the sense of balance is a really important sense. And it's not just the sense of balance when you're sitting on a stool, a physical sense of balance, but it's also about making balance and a sense of harmony in a social group. So I think looking more widely outside of Europe and the West for theorizing and ideas is helpful, and this is what ICME helps us to do. So we're looking at a human project of democracy then that helps us to overcome these restrictive stereotypes in leaps of invention. It's where diverse voices can speak and we can become politically active and change our limited views of each other. So in a nutshell, I recommend both and not either-or approaches to making museums fresh places of enunciation. And I argue that multisensory engagement, the to and fro of conversation, it's listening as well as speaking in museums that is really helpful to help us come to ideas about painters' work, either with color or light or shadow or texture or ideas. And to do this, I think that we can work with art historians and artists and poets and storytellers and dancers and musicians, and we can work collaboratively and benefit all our audiences. So I'm going to leave you today with a thought for our troubled times when governments around the world are increasingly moving to the right, with a South African word, Ubuntu. I am because you are. I think this gives us good advice. So, thank you.